Camille hadn't realized just how quiet the apartment was until her body hit the floor. It wasn't a fall so much as a surrender. Her legs had buckled beneath her like soaked paper, and now she was lying on the cold hardwood, her cheek pressed against the unyielding surface, every breath a mountain to climb. Across from her, maybe only 2 feet away, lay her daughter, Lily, so small, so still. 11 years old, too smart for her age, too brave for what was happening. Camille wanted to scream. To run. To reach out. But nothing moved except her thoughts, racing like wildfire behind her heavy eyes. Her limbs were lead. Her mouth, parched and numb. Her vision clouded, but not enough to miss what was happening around her. Then came the voice. Quiet. Calculated. Final. It's done. By morning, neither of them will wake. Dean. Her husband. The man she had once danced barefoot with in this very kitchen, laughing over burned pancakes and spilt coffee. His voice was low, almost casual, like he was checking off a task on a list. Her heart screamed while her body refused to obey. She heard the gentle shuffle of his feet retreating, slow and steady down the hallway. The front door clicked a moment later. He was gone. But not forever. Not unless she did something now. She turned her head ever so slightly, her neck aching from the effort. Lily's chest rose and fell faintly. She was still breathing. Camille summoned every ounce of strength left in her to lean in the tiniest bit closer, her lips barely grazing her daughter's ear. Don't move. Not yet, she whispered. It was more breath than sound, but Lily's eyelids flickered. Camille had no plan, not yet. All she had was a whisper of instinct, deep, ancestral, primal. It told her to wait, not to react. Reacting too early might be the final mistake. It hadn't always been like this. If someone had shown Camille a glimpse of this night even 6 months ago, she would have laughed in disbelief. Dean? Her Dean? The man who once spent a whole Saturday building Lily a homemade treehouse even though he was terrible with tools? The guy who wrote her bad poetry when they were dating and insisted on dancing with her at random moments in the kitchen? That man wouldn't have poisoned his family. But that man hadn't been around for a long time. The distance had started with small things. Missed dinners. Unanswered texts. Then came the bigger gaps, nights away, bank account charges she couldn't explain, and questions met with hostility. He'd become a stranger sleeping in her bed. She told herself it was work stress. Burnout. A midlife drift. And maybe it was. Until tonight. Until the dinner. Camille's eyes fluttered closed, but her mind didn't rest. It rewound. Played back the last 6 hours like a cruel movie. It had started at 4:42 p.m. She remembered the time exactly because she'd just finished folding laundry when the front door opened and Dean walked in. No warning, no call. Just there. And smiling. Thought I'd make dinner tonight, he said, holding up a brown paper bag like it was a trophy. Camille blinked. You're cooking? Dean chuckled. Just felt like it. It was strange, but not unwelcome. Things had been tense lately, but maybe, just maybe, this was him trying. They used to joke about how he couldn't boil water without burning it, and now here he was, digging through the pantry like he was preparing for a Food Network audition. Lily had been thrilled. Daddy's cooking? For real? Camille tried to suppress her unease. Looks like it. The meal had been simple. Too simple, maybe. Meatloaf, whipped yams, sautéed spinach. He hummed to himself as he worked, a soft tune she didn't recognize. She remembered the way he stirred the mashed yams with methodical rhythm, as though he'd practiced it. The dinner looked fine. Normal, even. But something about the yams stuck with her. The texture, the sheen. They were too smooth, unnaturally creamy. When she took a bite, the bitterness was subtle, almost hidden beneath the butter and nutmeg. But it was there. Camille had paused, reaching for her water, trying not to show her discomfort. Lily had wrinkled her nose. It tastes weird. Dean laughed. Guess I'm not Gordon Ramsay. She had smiled thinly, noting how he barely touched his own plate. And when he cleared his dish halfway through the meal, it hit her, this wasn't about dinner. This was a goodbye. Not the kind said with hugs or suitcases. The kind written in poison. The dizziness had hit fast after that. Not like low blood sugar or standing up too quick. No, this was chemical. Artificial. Her throat constricted, her limbs turned to jelly, and her vision pinholed at the edges. Across the table, Lily dropped her fork. Mom. I feel funny. Camille's pulse roared in her ears. She tried to move, to stand, but her legs gave way beneath her. She reached for Lily, catching only air. And then. The fall. The world sideways. The silence. Now, on the floor, with her breath shallow and her muscles slowly responding, she pieced together the truth. Dean had cooked them dinner. Dean had watched them eat. Dean had smiled. And Dean had tried to erase them. The whisper still echoed in her mind, by morning, neither of them will wake. But he was wrong. Because Camille was waking. And she wasn't leaving her daughter behind. Whatever came next, pain, danger, uncertainty, she would face it. Stillness had saved them this long. But soon, it would be time to move. To fight. To survive. Just a few hours earlier, the apartment had been filled with an unusual hum of domestic peace. Camille remembered it so clearly because peace had been missing from their lives for a long time. The first thing that struck her as odd was the time Dean came home, 4:42 p.m. He hadn't been home that early in months. Usually, his work kept him at the office well into the evening, or so he claimed. Sometimes he wouldn't show up at all, texting vague explanations like, "Working late. Don't wait up," with a flatness that sounded more like dismissal than apology. But that day, he walked in smiling, holding a grocery bag and wearing a crisp button-down shirt that looked too deliberate, too carefully chosen. "Thought I'd cook tonight," he said casually. Camille raised an eyebrow, still holding a laundry basket full of folded towels. "You're cooking?" Dean grinned like it was a joke they shared. "Hey, I know my way around a stove. Figured you could use a break." Camille hesitated. Everything about the moment felt out of place. Dean hated cooking. In their 12 years of marriage, he'd never done more than microwave leftovers. But here he was, walking in like a husband on a sitcom, relaxed, attentive, almost charming. She should have trusted her gut. Instead, she smiled faintly and said, "Sure. That sounds nice." He kissed her on the cheek, a gesture that once would have made her glow but now made her feel cold. Something about it felt rehearsed. Lily came bounding out of her room at the sound of the front door and practically lit up when she saw Dean by the kitchen counter, unpacking ingredients. "You're making dinner?" she asked excitedly. Dean nodded. "You got it, kiddo. Tonight's chef special, meatloaf, mashed yams, and spinach. What do you think?" Lily clapped her hands. "I love meatloaf." Camille watched their interaction with wary eyes. Dean hadn't shown this kind of affection in ages. He'd been a ghost in their home, physically present, emotionally miles away. But now, here he was, humming as he diced onions, peeling sweet potatoes with perfect rhythm, like he'd done it 1,000 times before. Camille moved through the rest of the afternoon in a daze. She set the table with the nicer dishes, the ones they usually reserved for holidays. Lily picked out a playlist and played it low in the background, classic jazz, Camille's favorite. It was all too perfect. Like a staged production of Normal. She peeked into the kitchen once, watching Dean work. He stood at the stove, stirring the mashed yams methodically, as though he was timing each movement. He had never moved like that in the kitchen before. It was too smooth, too practiced. Camille glanced at the cutting board, clean. No scraps. The sink was spotless. No mess. No chaos. It wasn't right. And yet, she didn't say anything. She wanted so badly for this moment to be real. She wanted her daughter to believe in her father again. She wanted, for just one night, to feel like they were still a family. Dinner was ready by 6:15. Dean brought the plates to the table himself, whistling under his breath. "Voila," he said, setting the food down. "Hope you're hungry." Camille stared at the plate. Meatloaf, mashed yams, sautéed spinach. It looked fine. Too fine. Dean sat down last, folding his napkin in his lap like he was dining at a 5-star restaurant. He raised his glass of water in a toast. "To family," he said. "And new beginnings." Camille forced a smile and clinked glasses. The sound was hollow. Lily dug in with enthusiasm, taking a big bite of meatloaf and mashing some yam onto her fork. Camille tasted the yams first. That's when the feeling started. The texture was too smooth. Not creamy in a natural way, but almost gelatinous. And underneath the butter and brown sugar, there was something else, a bitter note that lingered just a little too long on the tongue. She watched Lily take another bite and pause, her small face scrunching. "Tastes weird," she mumbled. Camille pushed her fork down. "It's fine. Just. Maybe the yams are a bit overmixed." Dean chuckled from across the table. "Guess I'm not ready for MasterChef." He didn't touch his own food. Instead, he sat back, sipping his water, watching them both like he was waiting for a light to flicker. Camille felt it next. A slow wave of pressure behind her eyes. Her tongue felt dry. Her pulse quickened. The room shifted slightly, like someone had tilted it 5 degrees. She reached for her glass, trying to act normal, but her fingers trembled as she lifted it. Lily's fork clattered against her plate. She was rubbing her stomach, her eyes wide. "Mommy. My tummy." Camille knew. This wasn't food poisoning. It was too fast, too sudden. It was pharmacological. Her heart began to race. Her skin felt wrong. Her breath turned shallow. Across the table, Dean was already standing, gathering his own plate like it was any other night. He wasn't panicking. He wasn't confused. He was calm. That's when it hit her like a truck. This was planned. He had poisoned them. She tried to stand. Her legs gave way beneath her. She crumpled to the floor beside Lily, reaching out, trying to catch her daughter as she fell too. Her eyes dimmed. Her body failed her. But her mind stayed on. And in that moment, a lifetime of nursing training and maternal instinct surged up inside her like fire. She whispered to Lily, who was barely conscious, "Don't move. Pretend. Stay still." Her child blinked, barely responsive, but she saw it, the smallest flicker of understanding. They lay there, side by side on the floor, unmoving. Dean returned. She heard him whisper, "It's done. By morning, neither of them will wake." And then he walked out like nothing had happened. Camille didn't move. She waited. Listened. Watched the shadows of the kitchen shift with the streetlight through the window. Only when she was certain the door had shut, only when silence pressed in like a second skin, did she gather what little strength she had. And whispered back. "Lily. The bathroom. We need to throw it up." The bathroom felt like a distant planet. Camille dragged herself across the floor, every inch of her body screaming with resistance. Her legs were useless, sluggish weights refusing to cooperate, and her arms barely had the strength to pull her forward. But she moved anyway, fueled by nothing more than adrenaline and a mother's desperation. Just a few feet ahead, Lily crawled slowly, her knees wobbling, her breathing shallow. They reached the small guest bathroom just past the hallway. Camille used her elbow to shut the door behind them, locking it with a shaky twist of her wrist. Then she turned on the faucet full blast, letting the rush of water cover any sounds they were about to make. The mirror above the sink reflected a ghost of herself, skin pale, lips dry, eyes bloodshot with panic. She couldn't focus on that. Not now. Over the sink, "Baby," she rasped, guiding Lily toward the porcelain basin. "You have to get it out." Lily nodded faintly, tears already streaming down her face. Her small hands gripped the edge of the sink as she opened her mouth and tried to retch, her body trembling with each dry heave. Camille knew there was no time for subtlety. She jammed 2 fingers down her own throat, praying she could force it out. Her body resisted, weak and disoriented, but eventually it gave in. A sickening surge rose from her stomach, and she vomited violently into the sink. Again. And again. Beside her, Lily followed, the sounds gut-wrenching and terrifying, but they were alive. They were fighting. Camille collapsed onto the cold tile floor, drenched in sweat, her back against the cabinet. She pulled Lily into her lap and wrapped her arms around her daughter's shivering frame. Lily whispered, "Mom. What's happening? Why would Daddy? Why?" Camille kissed the top of her head. "We don't have time, sweetheart. We need to get help. Now." She reached into her back pocket and pulled out her phone. It didn't turn on. No screen. No vibration. Nothing. She tried the power button again and again, but it was like holding a plastic brick. Dead. Camille's heart plummeted. She had charged it that morning. There was no reason it should have died, not unless it was sabotaged. She stumbled to her feet and grabbed the cordless wall phone in the hallway. No dial tone. She jiggled the cord, pressed buttons, flipped the base over. Dead. Her breath caught. Dean had planned this. Not just the dinner, not just the poison, but everything. He had cut off their lines of escape. This wasn't a panic decision. It was a cold, rehearsed exit strategy. Camille's hands were shaking as she returned to the bathroom. "We have to go. We can't stay here." "Where?" Lily's voice was small, raw. "To Miss Carroll's house," Camille said. Their neighbor. An older woman who lived alone and never missed an episode of Jeopardy! Camille had borrowed sugar from her just last week. "She'll help." She went to the cabinet under the sink and pulled out the emergency flashlight. It was small, but enough to light their way. She grabbed a hoodie, slipped it over Lily's tiny frame, and zipped it up. They made their way to the laundry room as quietly as they could. Every sound seemed deafening: the creak of the floor, the hum of the appliances, the click of the doorknob. Camille slowly opened the door to the garage, praying it wouldn't squeal too loud. The air was cool and sharp, a jarring contrast to the stale, poison atmosphere inside the house. The garage door was manual. Camille gripped the handle and slowly lifted, wincing at every metallic groan it made. Her eyes started toward the driveway. Empty. Dean was gone. Maybe watching. Maybe hiding. Maybe still nearby. But there was no time to wait. "Go," she whispered. Lily ran first, barefoot across the lawn, stumbling once but not stopping. Camille followed, every step a war against gravity. Her legs were barely functional, her lungs still struggling to keep up. But the distance between their house and Carol's porch had never felt more critical. Lily reached the porch and pounded on the door with what little strength she had. Camille stumbled up the steps just as the door opened. Carol's eyes widened in shock. "What on earth?" Camille grabbed the door frame. "He drugged us," she gasped. "Dean. My husband. He tried to kill us." Carol's face shifted from confusion to horror in a heartbeat. She stepped aside, pulled them both inside, and slammed the door shut. Lock. Chain. Deadbolt. "I'm calling the police," she said, snatching her landline off the receiver. "You're safe now. Just breathe, sweetheart." Camille collapsed onto the floral couch, holding Lily close. Her daughter's breathing was still ragged, but steadier. Her cheeks were flushed with exhaustion and fear. Within 5 minutes, the room was filled with red and blue lights. Paramedics rushed in. Camille watched them assess Lily first, asking questions, shining lights in her eyes. Then they turned to her. The flurry of motion, the gentle urgency in their voices, it all reminded her of her own days in the ER. Pulse irregular. BP low. Possible sedative ingestion, someone said. "Let's go. Now." As they were loaded into the ambulance, Camille looked down at Lily wrapped in a silver thermal blanket. Her daughter reached up and squeezed her hand, fingers cold but steady. Camille swallowed hard. They were alive. Just barely. At the hospital, everything blurred together: machines, voices, fluorescent lights. Tests. IVs. Nurses speaking gently but urgently. Blood drawn. Monitors beeping. Camille knew the drill. The doctor came in just over an hour later. His face was serious, but his voice was kind. "You were both given a powerful sedative, likely benzodiazepines, crushed and mixed into your food. Very high dosage. It was a miracle you were able to vomit it up in time. Most people wouldn't have made it." A miracle? No. Camille knew better. It wasn't luck. It was instinct. Timing. Stillness. Strategy. That tiny whisper in the dark, that unexplainable pull to not move, it had saved them. Dean's plan had failed. But Camille also knew this wasn't over. As she lay in the hospital bed that night, Lily asleep in the cot beside her, Camille stared at the ceiling. Dean wasn't just trying to leave them. He was trying to erase them. And whatever his reason, she would find it. And she would make sure he never got the chance to try again. The hospital room was quiet in the early hours of the morning. Outside the window, the city still buzzed with distant sirens and the faint hum of traffic, but inside, everything was hushed, like the world was holding its breath for what came next. Camille sat upright in her hospital bed, her body sore, her mind sharpened by adrenaline and grief. Lily lay asleep in the small cot next to her, wrapped in a hospital blanket, a stuffed rabbit, brought by a kind nurse, tucked under her arm. Her chest rose and fell with a fragile rhythm, but she was breathing. Safe. Alive. A knock on the door broke the stillness. Detective Nora Grant stepped in, a tall woman with sharp features and a notebook always in hand. She had the kind of calm presence that made people want to tell her everything. Camille had already spoken with her once the night before, but this time, the energy in the room was different. "We have some updates," Detective Grant said softly, sitting in the chair beside her bed. "Do you feel strong enough to talk?" Camille nodded. "I've been waiting." The detective opened her notebook, flipped a page. "We put out a statewide alert after speaking with you. He didn't return to your home after the incident. Based on your statements, we assumed he'd try to leave the area quickly." "And?" Camille's voice trembled, not from weakness, but from the need to know. "He made it as far as O'Hare International. We found him at Terminal 3, trying to board a flight to Zurich using a fake passport under the name Darren Cole. He had a second phone, cash in multiple currencies, and a travel bag with documents we believe were forged. Camille's lips parted in shock. She had expected Dean to run, but Zurich? A whole new life? He planned this, she whispered. Not just the dinner. The whole thing. For how long? The detective paused. That's the next part. She reached into her satchel and pulled out a few photos, bank documents, screenshots of money transfers, even a rental application for a luxury apartment overseas. Camille stared at them, numb. He's been preparing this for at least 3 months. Possibly longer. Multiple withdrawals from your joint savings. Credit cards opened in your name. He was liquidating everything, slowly, so you wouldn't notice. Camille exhaled sharply. But why? Just then, the door opened again, and Rachel, Camille's younger sister, stepped in. She held a cup of tea in one hand, her expression tight and pale. She'd flown in the moment she got the news and hadn't left the hospital since. I think I can answer that, Rachel said softly. Camille blinked. What do you mean? Rachel set the tea down on the side table and took a seat near Lily. She stared at her niece for a moment before meeting Camille's eyes. I didn't know how to tell you. I didn't even know if I should tell you. But I saw Dean with someone. About 2 months ago. Camille felt the room tilt. Someone? Rachel nodded, guilt swimming in her eyes. A girl. Maybe 24, 25. They were at that French place near Lincoln Park. At first, I thought maybe it was a client dinner, but he kissed her before they even got inside. I followed them after. They went to a condo building near the lake. Spent the night. I didn't confront him. I didn't tell you. I didn't know what to do. Camille stared at her sister, her stomach twisting, not in anger, but in horror. It all connected now. Dean hadn't just wanted out of the marriage. He didn't just want to cheat. He wanted to start over. Detective Grant leaned forward. We've looked into the woman. Her name is Alessia Caro. Daughter of a recently deceased investment mogul. She's set to inherit a sizable trust, on the condition that she marry someone with a clean financial and familial slate. No prior marriages. No dependents. Camille's breath caught. He was erasing us, she whispered. Not just leaving, but deleting everything that didn't fit. Detective Grant nodded. With the right paperwork, if you died under the influence of sedatives at home, it could have looked like a tragic accident. A faulty prescription, maybe an overdose. He wouldn't even have to push it. Just wait. You wouldn't be around to challenge anything. Camille's hands gripped the edge of her blanket, knuckles white. He tried to murder his own daughter, she said, the words sour on her tongue. For money. For image. For freedom, Rachel added, disgust in her voice. Freedom from responsibility. From truth. He's being charged with attempted murder, premeditated poisoning, child endangerment, identity fraud, and unlawful flight from prosecution, Detective Grant said. He pled not guilty. But with everything we've found, the fake ID, the toxicology, your statement, his attorney is already discussing a plea. Camille closed her eyes. The wave of nausea returned, not from the poison, but from the emotional aftermath. Her husband, her child's father, had tried to kill them both with the same calmness as flipping a switch. What happens now? She asked. The prosecution will push for life without parole. Given the circumstances, and his detailed planning, it's likely he'll get it. Silence stretched between them. Camille looked over at Lily, still asleep, her hand curled into a loose fist against the stuffed rabbit. Her cheeks were flushed with color now, healthier. Innocent. She doesn't know the full truth yet, Camille murmured. And I don't know how to tell her. You'll find the way, Rachel said, reaching out to squeeze her hand. Camille nodded slowly. I thought I knew him. I thought I married someone who would do anything to protect us. Rachel didn't respond. There was no answer for that. But Camille knew the truth now. Dean hadn't been trying to escape them, he had been trying to erase the version of himself that was tied to responsibility, love, and reality. The version that included a wife who loved him and a daughter who trusted him. And when it got too heavy to carry, he'd chosen the unthinkable. Camille looked out the window again. Morning light was breaking over the horizon. This was the end of something. And the beginning of something else. Whatever came next, she would face it. Not as a victim. But as a survivor. 3 months later, the morning sun shone differently through the windows of Rachel's guest bedroom. It wasn't the apartment Camille had once called home, the place where she'd built a life and nearly lost it. No. That home had been emptied, first of love, then of safety, and eventually, of meaning. The place that once echoed with laughter and soft footsteps now stood cold, silent, and under investigation. Here, in Rachel's modest but sun-drenched townhouse on the city's quieter edge, the world had begun to feel bearable again. Camille sat at the kitchen table with a cup of coffee, watching Lily play on the floor with a small Lego set. The TV was on low in the background, airing an old cartoon that Lily had started to like again, almost as if her mind craved the familiarity of her younger years. She was quieter now, more cautious. But every day, she reclaimed a little more of her voice. Camille didn't push her to talk about that night. She answered what questions came, gently, truthfully, but never forced the rest. Healing, she had come to realize, had no timeline. It was a puzzle that built itself slowly, one piece at a time. The doctors had cleared them both of any long-term physical damage. The sedative had been strong, deadly even, but their quick thinking, vomiting, crawling, escaping, had saved their lives. Camille could still hear the doctor's voice in her head. If you'd waited even 15 more minutes, the effects would have been irreversible. You were incredibly lucky. But it wasn't luck. It was awareness. It was instinct. It was a whisper in the dark. She looked down at her coffee, her hands wrapped tightly around the mug. The heat comforted her now in a way words couldn't. Some mornings, she woke up with a jolt, heart pounding, skin clammy, half expecting Dean's shadow in the doorway. Other mornings, she simply watched Lily from across the room and felt overwhelmed by the fragile enormity of their survival. The trial had ended 2 weeks ago. Dean was convicted on multiple counts: attempted first-degree murder, child endangerment, possession and use of a controlled substance with intent to harm, identity fraud, and obstruction of justice. The jury deliberated for less than 3 hours. The weight of the evidence, the fake passport, the texts with his mistress, the doctored banking activity, and Camille's clear, methodical testimony, left no room for doubt. He had planned to start over with a woman who didn't know the full truth of him. A woman who came with conditions. No prior commitments. No messy baggage. No child. No wife. Just the clean image of a successful, untethered man. Camille had listened to the verdict from the back row of the courtroom, surrounded by a few friends, Rachel, and a grief counselor she'd started seeing regularly. She didn't cry. She didn't speak. She simply closed her eyes as the words "life without parole" echoed through the courtroom, and breathed. Justice, in its own cold way, had arrived. But peace? That was something else. She glanced up from her mug and saw Lily building a tower with her blocks. At one point, it leaned too far and collapsed. Lily sighed, then quietly began again. That's what healing looked like. Camille had begun to go on short walks again. Some days she journaled. Other days she didn't get dressed until noon. But she was trying. She was living. People asked her, reporters, counselors, even friends, what she had learned from it all. What she would say to someone else in a similar situation. She never had a short answer. But in the quiet hours, when the world slowed, she found the words. It wasn't about rage. Or vengeance. Or even betrayal. It was about stillness. That night, on the floor of her kitchen, she hadn't fought back with fists. She hadn't screamed. She hadn't run. She had listened. Watched. Trusted her instincts, even when they didn't make sense. And in that stillness, she found clarity. Strategy. Survival. We teach people to be polite, she told her counselor. To not jump to conclusions. To give others the benefit of the doubt. But no one teaches us to trust our gut. Especially when that gut is whispering something terrifying. She paused, then added, but doubt is a kind of gift too. And sometimes, it saves your life. Rachel had turned part of the garage into a playroom for Lily. Camille helped repaint the walls, a soft lavender, Lily's favorite. The room had a white bookshelf, a reading nook, and beanbags piled like clouds. Some days, Lily stayed in there for hours. Sometimes she drew pictures of houses and birds. Other times, she just sat in silence, humming softly to herself. At night, Lily still crawled into Camille's bed now and then. She never said why. Camille never asked. She just held her until morning. Camille had filed for full custody, of course. Not that it was contested. The judge signed it without hesitation. As for Dean, he hadn't spoken a word since the sentencing. Not to Camille. Not to Lily. Not to anyone. The man who once talked his way into every boardroom, every party, every moment. Now had nothing left to say. Camille no longer wondered why. She no longer needed answers from him. She had built a new truth for herself. One not based on appearances or obligations, but on real, raw instinct. A life where she would never again ignore the subtle tightening in her chest, the shiver along her spine, the unexplained dread in her gut. Because survival wasn't always loud. It wasn't always a fight. Sometimes it was a whisper. A pause. A choice not to move. And that had saved both their lives. The front door clicked shut as Rachel came in, holding grocery bags. Lily ran to her aunt, beaming. "I built a tower as tall as the couch." Rachel smiled and ruffled her hair. "You'll have to show me after dinner." Camille stood up from the table, her coffee now cold. She looked out the window as golden light poured across the kitchen counter. 3 months ago, she had collapsed in a room that had become her prison. Now, in a house filled with love and healing, she stood tall, free. Still healing. Still broken in places. But free. And that was more than enough.